I know many of us are frustrated with the state of the union, with how things are going in Congress. To help me better understand and provide some solutions, I have former Senator Rick Santorum with me. Senator, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure. It's great to be on your podcast. I appreciate it.
So many of the guests that I have on, we talk about the problems, but rarely do we talk about the solution. And so we're going to definitely jump into that. But to start us out, I wanted to read a quote from Representative Chip Roy of Texas and get your thoughts on it. He says, "The truth is, Congress is corrupt as it comes, and the swamp has been getting what it wants for decades. We have a corporate media apparatus to protect it and shiny brands for the ineffective legislators to hide behind while they betray every promise to their voters. People are waking up." What are your thoughts on Representative Roy's words and warning?
I mean, there's certainly a grain of truth in it. I'm not sure it's quite as I would describe it quite the way he does. But the reality is that Washington is set up to perpetuate itself, and and they have. And the only reason I would disagree is that it makes it sound like the public has nothing to do with this. That the public is just this unwilling hostage that Washington is taking along. I mean, if that were the case, then this would be a lot easier. But it's not that easy. The reality is a lot of what Washington has become is because the public has agreed to it becoming as such. For example, if you look at all of the entitlement spending that goes on, there are very few of those programs that if you ask the American public if you'd want to get rid of them or change them, that they would be in agreement with. Yet that's two-thirds of the spending in Washington, D.C. So a lot of this is that the public has been convinced or believes, independent of Washington, that all of this spending is necessary and that the size and scope of the federal government is a good thing. Now, uh, it's one of those things where if they take a step back and you say, well, does Washington spend too much? The answer is yes. Does it do? Is it corrupt? Yes. Is it fraudulent? Yes. It's all those things. But when you ask them about their particular program, they'll say, "Well, wait a minute. You can't touch my Social Security, or you can't touch my Medicaid, or you can't touch my Medicare, or you can't." That's the problem. And what's happened is that the American public uh, has um, has been bribed to accept Washington for the way it is, and so there has to be some mechanism that now that the public has sort of been bought off, and now they haven't been bought off on everything, and there's a lot of things that in which Chip is right. There are a lot of programs and things that are going on, but candidly, it's a very small part of the federal government. The structural reform that's needed is like any budget. You need some limits. You need every family would spend whatever they want to spend if they had unlimited resources. It's not human nature. And so the point is we all need parameters. We all need guardrails, everybody in life. And Washington doesn't have any. And that's the real problem. And what I'm suggesting and what we've been asking for is internally, there is no incentive for Washington to fix itself because the more money you give away, the more popular you are. And so the if you borrow money, well, that's easy because you're not charging anybody any taxes, and so the deficit just goes up, and someday that may come to roost with an economic collapse or a huge devaluation of the dollar or rampant inflation or whatever it is. But I'll probably be gone by then, and that we'll all deal with it then. That so the incentives are all wrong, and so that the answer is you need some sort of outside force to impose limits because you're not going to get it from within inside because there's certainly no incentive for the individual member to advocate for that as one that did and in part lost an election because of it. I can tell you that very few people do it, and Chip is one of them. Good, God bless him. He's from a district where that probably more people would agree with him that there needs to be limitation, but the vast majority do not, and so that's why we're my emphasis after I've left Washington is to see what we can do to put external controls on Washington, D.C., because internal controls are doomed to fail.
Okay. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. I've heard it said the hardest money to spend is your own, and the easiest money to spend is someone else's. And so,
Yeah.
like you say, without those limitations, they want to get reelected. They want to be popular. At the same time, the American people, they don't want these programs that they've become accustomed to or dependent on to go away. I wanted to get your thoughts on the United States Congress over the weekend. There's very mixed feelings about this $90+ billion foreign aid bill. Most of the data that I'm reading online is that about 70% of Americans didn't want more money to go to Ukraine, and about 90% want more money spent on the border or on the United States herself. Why is it that Congress seems to focus on the pet projects they care about, but not necessarily the voice of the people?
I always said two ways. Number one, that 99% of the money that is spent in this country, in Washington, is spent in this country, plus 99+%. Foreign aid is less than 1% of the federal budget. As someone who believes foreign aid is absolutely necessary, because if you don't have any money to influence your friends and your enemies to do what you want them to do, then you have to use, instead of, that's called, I call soft power. So you influence people by, creating carrots and sticks, right? So foreign aid is a carrot by and large. The military is a stick. The more you can use carrots, the less you use sticks. Sticks are a lot more expensive than carrots, because our sticks are multi-billion-dollar weapon systems. And so the idea that the federal government should not use, and there's some, I've heard some congressmen say, "Oh, I'm against foreign aid completely." Well, that's just ridiculous. I mean, that just means that you're going to spend 5, 10, 20 times as much to use a stick to get people to do what you want, or to protect our national security, than it is to use the carrot. I would rather have, if Russia is invading a country that's an ally of ours, I would rather give a few carrots to Ukraine to fight that battle than getting, the several divisions of our troops and several of our planes, and spend literally tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars to fight that battle. That makes no sense. And so I just reject the idea that somehow or another this is Congress not listening to the American public. I think this is the big problem with Joe Biden, and frankly with a lot of Republicans, is they don't do a very good job explaining what this is all about. They don't do a very good job trying to say, look, here's what we're doing, here's what we're trying to accomplish. And the reason they don't is because Joe Biden doesn't have a plan. I mean, he absolutely has no idea what he's doing. He never has. He's been someone who, for 12 years, he's been probably the worst senator that I have ever seen. And his decisions having to do with national security, he's just been on the wrong side every single time. And this time, he's not on the wrong side in the sense that I think he's right in supporting Ukraine and supporting Israel and supporting Taiwan. He's just doing it in the most feckless, disorganized, lack of vision, lack of game plan, lack of end game. I mean, there's just nothing other than, well, we have to do this because if we don't, then bad things are going to happen. And so we'll do a little bit of this. And then, but at the same time, we're going to appease Russia, and we're going to appease Iran, and we're going to do it. It's just a mess. And the public has no idea what he's doing. And so, of course, you're going to have people out there saying, "Oh, this is terrible." And, to some degree, I can understand the argument. But if you don't have a counter narrative that's at all persuasive, it's easy to be critical.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe to the lay person, what they are seeing is high inflation coupled with a border situation. And so it feels like, or it's perceived as if all of this money is going abroad and none of it is being spent internally.
Yeah, that just isn't true. And first off, even the money that's going to be take the money for Ukraine, over half of that money is actually being spent in America on ammunition and weapon systems that's employing American workers and paying for jobs here in America. So yes, I mean the money that these weapon systems are going and ammunition is going to Ukraine, but it's being manufactured here in the U.S. So even much of the foreign aid, a lot of the foreign aid we give is food aid. So we ship food over there, we ship medicine over there, all made here in the U.S. And so again, I get the understanding that people are frustrated, but we're spending trillions and trillions of dollars domestically. The fact that we don't have a secure border isn't because we don't have the money. It's because we have a president that doesn't want to secure the border. And he will do whatever it takes, and the president and the Democratic Party that doesn't want to secure the border because they want, number one, cheap labor, because that helps keep inflation down. They believe they want these folks coming to California and to other states so they can turn them into little Democratic voters someday, because they think eventually there'll be amnesty and that these folks, because they've been on their side, will vote for them. And they also are using it in the census. You know, California is losing population, gaining a lot of illegal immigrants. And when they count for the census, they count illegal immigrants. So it helps them keep their political clout. Same thing with New York, which is hemorrhaging people. There's all sorts of reasons the Democrats want to do this. It's not because of money. And so this is the problem I have with folks who argue, well, it's, we're not prioritizing money. There's nobody prioritizes money. They just spend whatever they want. It's the bottom line is they don't want to spend money on the border. That's what Joe Biden is basically telling.
Okay, wow, that's a good perspective. Tell my audience about this convention of the states. What is it? How would it benefit the country? And how can we be involved in it?
As I was mentioning earlier when we were talking about Chip Roy's comment. And again, I agree with a lot of what he says. The bottom line is, and I think you've talked to most members of Congress who would be honest with you, they would tell you that the Congress is broken, that the presidency is broken, that there's no incentive, as we were talking about before, for people to live within their means. There's no incentive not for Washington, D.C. to do everything for everybody. And this is another problem. It's not just spending. It's the authority that they are taking over every aspect of our lives. I hear people complain about campaign finance and say, so much money is being spent on all these federal races. Well, you know why? Because the federal government does everything. The federal government is involved in every aspect of our life. If the federal government wasn't involved in our lives, no one would be spending money on these races. I mean, who spends money on races for a state senator in South Dakota? Nobody. I mean, those races cost $10,000, if that. Why? Because their power is fairly limited, and they don't do much. It has a huge impact on a lot of people. I mean, South Dakota is what? Less than 1 million people. So the races don't cost much money. But a South Dakota a South Dakota congressman, a South Dakota senator. I mean, I remember back when I was in the Senate, the most expensive race in the country was in South Dakota. It was at the time, it was like 50, 60, 70 million dollars in a state that has less than 1 million people. Why? Well, it's not because South Dakota was all that power or the people in South Dakota. It's because that one vote has so much impact on the trillions of dollars we spend, on the regulation that we spend and that we pass. So it is the fact that Washington has gotten too powerful. It has gotten more powerful than our founders ever envisioned. They always believed that they always. I don't know if you lost me there. But,
no, I'm still here. Yep.
Okay. They always believed that federalism was the way our country would remain free, safe, and prosperous. And what does that mean? That means that we make decisions in America with respect to the problems of everyday Americans' lives closest to the people. So if you have a sewer problem, you should probably solve that problem locally. It's not a national problem, right? Whether your sewage system or whether your water system works, or whether a dog is barking next door that's bothering you, right? Those are local issues.
that your street is safe, that your garbage is picked up. All those things can and should be decided locally. But increasingly, we say, oh, we have such a big sewage problem, a sewer problem, our sewage systems are antiquated. We need a big federal program to fix them all. And so we take over the sewage business in America. We have transportation problems. So we have to have a national transportation program. And we take over control and education. I mean, I always ask people when I was running for office, who's responsible for the education of your children? I'll ask you that question. Who's responsible for the education of your children?
I am.
Yeah, you are. And I think most Americans would say that, but that's not what they believe in Washington. They believe they're responsible for the education of their children. And in fact, there are people in the local community who believe that they're responsible for the education of their children and that you really have no rights at all with respect to the education of your children. But that attitude, imagine, you have to fight your local school board for what's actually being fought. But now increasingly, your school board is being dictated to by Washington. And they in some cases don't even have a choice because Washington ties so much money to what they want to do. So my whole point is in getting to all these issues. The whole idea of federalism was America will be strong and free and safe and prosperous. And when I say free, that people in Montana will have different values than people in New York City. And obviously there was no Montana and there was no big New York City at the time of the founding. There were rural areas, there were urban areas, there were coastal areas, there were mountainous areas, there were big states, small states. So there was, believe it or not, a fair amount of diversity even back in 1787. And they realized as this country was going to grow and prosper, that New England's going to be different than the South, and that the mountain states are going to be different than the plain states. And so they wanted a system that allowed people to be free in the context of where they chose to live, not just free in an abstract sense, but really living the lifestyle they wanted, which is very different as you go place to place in this country. And the only way you do that is that decisions not be made up here at Washington, where everybody has to be told they have to act and be the same, but that they're made at the local level. And to the extent you can't solve it there, then you make it at the state level. And the extent that it's a bigger problem, like national security, which you can't defend in Iowa. I mean, there are no borders in Iowa that need to be defended. Then you have the federal government come in. That's the way the thing was structured. And for 140 years, that's the way 130 years, that's the way America worked. And then there was a change. And the change came about because the progressive era convinced Americans that the United States Senator was a barrier to progress, and that it was a corrupt institution that was operated by the states. So most people don't know that prior to 1912, the United States senators were elected not by the public, but by the state legislatures. People think of the Lincoln-Douglas debates. Lincoln and Douglas were not running against each other in a race. They were running to help the Republicans or the Democrats win the state house and state senate in Illinois, and whoever won the state legislative races would nominate and would elect the senator. And so that worked well in doing one fundamentally, vitally important thing for America, which was keeping Washington small. Up until 1912, the federal government was insignificant in the lives of most Americans. The largest source of federal revenue, I don't know if you know this, but what do you think the largest source of federal revenue was in 1912?
Oh, gosh. I don't know. Maybe selling land? I don't know.
Excise tax on alcohol.
Oh, wow. Okay.
See that? Yeah, excise tax on alcohol. And it's one of the reasons that the progressives and the right and the left came together in Prohibition. And there was a deal made at the time, right around the time of the 17th Amendment in 1912, where the income tax went in, the 16th Amendment, and Prohibition went in, the 15th Amendment, because in order for Prohibition to pass, they had to have another source of income for the federal government. So the teetotalers supported the income tax, so the left would support Prohibition, and that's the deal that was made, which was, of course, a horrible deal for conservatives. But that tells you how insignificant Washington was with respect to the lives of most Americans. So nobody really cared who the president was. Most people didn't care who the senator was. And why? Because nobody cared about Washington. And subsequent to the Senate being elected, all of a sudden you had this body for 130 years that blocked any legislation that would have threatened the power of the states, that would have taken power away from state and local governments, from the people, and given it to Washington. The Senate was the barrier for that to happen. Once they became popularly elected, well, now I got to get reelected. Now I have to do things to get to, I have to do things in Washington for the people to vote for me, and they did. And that's when government began to expand. Then you take the New Deal, it expanded even more, and then the courts got into the game, and after Roosevelt tried to pack the court and started to approve and reread the Constitution. And so this all took off because we had a structural change in the way our government functioned. And I make the argument, the only way to restore any kind of fiscal sanity or limitation of federal power is for a constitutional structural change that will reimpose some of those limits that were taken away in 1912.
Okay. Wow. Interesting. Now, that story you told of how expensive the races are or can be in the Dakotas makes sense why Republicans are now fighting so hard to get one extra vote in Nebraska with the Electoral College. Yeah. Just that one person or that one vote can swing the country when things really get down to the wire. How can people learn more about the Convention of the States and how that would benefit the country? Where can I point them towards?
What the Convention of States wants to do is call an Article 5 convention. An Article 5 convention, people say, well, don't mess with the Constitution. Well, Article 5 is in the Constitution. There are two ways to amend the Constitution. One is for Congress to propose amendments, which we've had 27 amendments since the beginning of the country, 10 of which were passed at the founding. They're called the Bill of Rights. So if you think about it, since 1787, there's only been 17 amendments that have passed, 2 of them passing prohibition and repealing it. So there's still only 15 amendments that have been passed and are on the books today in America. So it's really hard to pass a constitutional amendment. Why? Well, the way it's been done in the past is for Congress to propose. And in that case, you need 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate to propose an amendment. Then the amendment goes to the states and goes to the legislatures in the states. And the legislatures, not the governor, just the legislatures, have to ratify it. And 3/4, 38 states have to ratify it. So that's why it's really hard. There's no higher barrier anywhere in America to get anything done than changing the Constitution. And that's all well and good. In our case, the second provision of Article 5 is for the state legislatures to pass a resolution on a specific area of what you want to amend. And in our case, we want to, what we're proposing for in an Article 5 convention is a limitation on fiscal limitations on the federal government, which we've been talking about, limitations on power and jurisdiction, we've been talking about, and limitation on terms for Congress and federal bureaucrats and judges. So those would be the 3 subject areas, all limiting power, scope, spending, terms of federal officials. And if 2/3 of the states, just like 2/3 of the House and Senate, would have to propose an amendment. If 2/3 of the states agree with this joint resolution that we're trying to get passed, and we've passed it in roughly 20 states so far, if we can get to 34 states or 2/3 of the states, then there would be a convention called where all 50 states would participate and debate amendments that would be limited to these 3 subject areas. And then if any amendments are proposed from that, in this case, it's 1 state, 1 vote, 26 states would have to support an amendment to be proposed. Then any proposed amendment would then be sent to the state legislatures again, and 3/4 of the states would have to ratify. So it's a difficult and long process, but to me, as someone who's seen the importance of structural reform, having a national debate, and that's what this convention would cause. It would cause a national debate about the role of the federal government, the role of the states, the role of the individual. What should be the balance of power? We don't talk about that. We never even discuss it in Congress or in the legislature. But now you'd actually have the need for every student in America to learn about their Constitution, learn about federalism. Most people don't even know what the things I just discussed with you. Most people don't know, and the ideas behind that. And let's have a national discussion. Let's get movements behind different amendments, and have what we should have in this country, which is a robust debate about the future of our country. And that's why I'm excited to be involved in this.
Yeah, I think the one that people most resonate with or maybe understand the best would be term limits on members of Congress. That seems to be the one that people understand. But the fiscal and the other areas are also extremely important. I want to point people towards this really quickly. I just want my audience to know. You guys have so many big names backing this: Vivek Ramaswamy, Senator Rand Paul, Dr. Ben Carson, Governor Greg Abbott, James O'Keefe, Charlie Kirk. I could name 100 times more, but those are names of people that have been on my show that support this. So I want to point them directly to that. What is the best website that I can send them to?
Yeah, it's Convention of States Action, or cosaction.com. That will put you on there. You can read all about it. It's a great. I really encourage you to go there, look at myths and facts. That there's a whole section on what people say could happen, and sort of scare. There was a book written a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago now, by Russ Feingold. I don't know if you know that name or not. He's a former senator from Wisconsin, very liberal. He wrote a book a year and a half ago saying that this was the greatest threat to the progressive movement in the history of the country, and that we should do everything we can to defeat it. Every left-wing group in America is against this. They see this as a threat to their increasing authoritarian centralization of power in Washington, D.C. So it's a real opportunity to sort of get back to allowing people to live their lives consonant with where they decided to live in America, as opposed to, I believe that America's always been divided. People in the mountain states have always been different than people in the cities. That's why they left the cities to move to the mountains, right? But we've never seen this division because we've never seen so much federal power trying to get everybody to live the same way. And so it's not that America's more divided. It's that division is more apparent because everything's being run out of Washington. If everything was being run out of the states and Washington had a little role, then Montana's legislature is not going to do what California's does, or New York's does, or Alabama's does. And so there would be divisions, but it wouldn't be in your face. It wouldn't be someone from California telling people in Alabama, this is the way you're going to run your schools. This is the kind of cars you got to drive. Here are the kind of toilets you're going to flush. But increasingly, as all these decisions bubble up and are held by Washington, we have these fights that are unnecessary. That's the whole point. Yeah, we can have division. Division's great. We'll always have divisions, but we don't have to beat each other's throats if we just let people live in communities of interest that they agree with. And the problem with the left is they don't want you to do that. They want you to live under their rules. They want to impose those rules over you. Whereas conservatives say, you know what, if California wants to be a woke republic and have people stealing stuff from their stores and people living on the streets and free drugs and all that, if that's the hellhole they want to live in, then go ahead. Just don't impose it upon me. That's not the way the left looks at it. The left says, no, we think this is the best way for everybody, and we're going to impose our hellhole on you. And that's the difference.
Yeah. You made me think of, I'm trying to remember her name. I think it's Representative Ayanna Pressley. She just gave a speech about how Walgreens is racist for moving out of these inner cities, but they keep being robbed every single day. And it's like, no, they're making that choice to move out because they don't want to keep getting robbed. The same goes for the people Let them choose where they want to live, but also let them have a voice. So, Senator Rick Santorum, thank you so much for coming on. Your service to the country, your continued service towards getting this term limits and the Convention of the States in place. I'm going to leave a link down below, but thank you so much, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Appreciate the time.